This is the Cecil Hotel, a place where the walls whisper secrets and the shadows feel heavy. For nearly a century, this building in the heart of Skid Row has been a magnet for misery, suicides, brutal murders, and even housing serial killers like Richard Ramirez. But no tragedy there is more baffling or more captured on film than what happened to 21-year-old Elisa Lam. She was a bright Canadian traveler on a solo trip who vanished in February 2013. The search was cold, quiet, and going nowhere until the police released a single, chilling piece of video evidence. It's a 4-minute security clip from inside an elevator, and it's become one of the most disturbing mysteries of the digital age. It shows Elisa pressing buttons, hiding in the corner, and arguing with something unseen just outside the doors. Then, she walks away, up toward the locked roof, and into an impossible grave. This isn't just true crime. This is a real-life horror show caught on camera. Elisa Lam was a student from Vancouver, Canada, a beautiful young woman with a vibrant spirit and a passion for travel. Like many people her age, she documented her life online, sharing her excitement and experiences with friends and strangers. She had struggled with bipolar disorder, a fact her family knew and managed with her, but it didn't define her. She was a traveler on a journey of self-discovery, exploring California on a solo adventure. The trip was supposed to be a liberating experience, a chance to see the world and feel truly independent. Her plan was simple: take public transportation, stay in budget hotels, and soak up the unique atmosphere of the West Coast. She arrived in San Diego, then made her way up to Los Angeles. Everything was going according to plan. She called her parents daily, sometimes twice a day, to check in and let them know she was safe. These calls were a routine, a lifeline for a family who loved her dearly. The last of these reassuring calls came on January 31st, 2013. That day, Elisa checked into the infamous Cecil Hotel in downtown LA. Now, the Cecil Hotel isn't just any old building. It's a landmark of urban decay and true crime, sitting in a part of the city known as Skid Row. It's a place where history's darkness seems to cling to the walls. It had been the temporary home of serial killers like Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, and Jack Unterweger. But to a young traveler looking for an affordable room in a central location, it was just a place to sleep. Elisa was initially assigned a shared room on the 5th floor, but due to a complaint from her roommates about her odd behavior, which the hotel later described vaguely, she was moved to a private room. This detail is crucial because it's the first small, unsettling indicator that something was slightly off, even before the big event. Her new room, a small, solitary space, was the last place she was confirmed to be resting her head. The next morning, February 1st, Elisa didn't call home. The routine was broken. Her parents immediately felt a terrifying knot in their stomachs. Something was terribly wrong. Elisa's sudden silence wasn't just a missed call. It was a complete and total cessation of communication. Her travel plans, her daily check-ins, her online presence, everything stopped dead. Her family, thousands of miles away, initiated the frantic search. They contacted the LAPD, and soon, the missing persons report was filed. The solo adventure had turned into a desperate, international investigation centered on a dilapidated hotel with a sinister history. The clock was ticking, and the last known location of their daughter was the heart of a city known for its shadows. The search began, but the hotel, it seemed, was determined to keep its secrets. When the police arrived at the Cecil Hotel, they were met with a confusing mix of uncooperative management and eerie silence. The hotel, operating in a notorious section of downtown LA, was accustomed to unusual happenings, but a missing person, especially a tourist, was an escalation. Detectives began their routine canvass. They interviewed the hotel staff, many of whom gave vague or conflicting accounts. Some remembered seeing Elisa, others claimed not to. The hotel manager, who would later become a figure of intense scrutiny in the online world, insisted they were cooperating fully, but the initial searches of the premises yielded nothing. Elisa's room was exactly as one would expect of a traveler. Her belongings were mostly there: clothes, toiletries, personal items. But there was no sign of a struggle, no forced entry, and perhaps most importantly, no suicide note. Her phone and wallet were not mentioned as being present or missing in the early reports, a small detail that further muddled the picture. It was as if she had simply walked out and vanished into the city's concrete maze. However, given her history of mental health challenges, the police initially leaned toward the possibility that she had walked away, perhaps in a disoriented state. The search expanded. Police and K-9 units meticulously combed the entire 15 floors of the hotel. Every closet, every staircase, every service area was checked. The rooftop, a restricted area usually locked to guests, was searched. They found nothing. For a building that was supposed to be under some kind of security and surveillance, it felt far too easy for a young woman to disappear without a trace. The vast, winding corridors and numerous hidden corners of the vintage structure seemed to absorb any evidence. The family, growing increasingly desperate, flew from Vancouver to Los Angeles to assist in the search. They distributed flyers, organized their own search parties, and made public pleas for information. The case began to get media attention, but without a body or a clear crime scene, it was a frustrating dead end. This is where the narrative pivots from a standard missing person case into the truly bizarre. The only potential lead, the only thing that could shed light on Elisa's final moments, was the hotel's network of security cameras. The hotel security footage was the key. It was supposed to show everyone who entered and left the building, offering a definitive timeline. But the majority of the footage was either non-existent, faulty, or, strangely, didn't show Elisa at all. It was as if the cameras themselves were conspiring to hide the truth. Finally, after weeks of searching, the police found one piece of footage, a single clip that was completely intact, and it would soon become the focal point of a global obsession. This wasn't the footage they expected to find, a clear image of her leaving the hotel. Instead, it was an unnerving, 4-minute snapshot of a private, profoundly disturbing moment, captured in the confines of a small, dimly lit elevator. On February 19th, 3 weeks after Elisa Lam vanished, the Los Angeles Police Department made the unusual decision to release a piece of security footage to the public. This footage was from a single camera inside one of the Cecil Hotel's elevators. The decision was born out of pure desperation. The case was cold, and they hoped the public could identify someone or something in the video. What they released, however, was not just a tip-gathering tool. It was a deeply unsettling 4-minute glimpse into an event that seemed to defy rational explanation. The video is grainy, silent, and dated February 1st, the last day Elisa was seen. It begins with Elisa entering the elevator car. She's wearing a red hoodie over a gray shirt and shorts. She pushes several buttons, presumably for the floors she wants to go to, and then steps to the corner, waiting. The doors, however, do not close. They remain stubbornly open. This is the first strange detail. She peers out, quickly and cautiously, to her right, and then to her left. She quickly steps back into the car, positioning herself near the control panel, her back to the doors. It looks like she's hiding, trying to make herself small and unseen. After a few seconds, she darts to the door again, leaning her head out into the hallway. She swings her arms and moves her hands in a strange, almost wave-like or pleading gesture. To whom is she gesturing? The camera, fixed inside the elevator, provides no answer. It's as if the recipient of her gestures is just outside the frame, an invisible character in this unsettling play. She then steps out of the elevator completely, into the hallway, standing right next to the doorframe. Her actions become even more erratic. She begins to move her hands rapidly and wildly, almost as if she is arguing with someone or something unseen. She runs her fingers through her hair, her head moving in a disconcerted manner. She re-enters the elevator, presses all the buttons again, and repeats the routine. When the doors still refuse to close, she steps back out and walks off, out of the camera's view. The entire scene is played out in jerky, fragmented movements, giving the impression of intense distress or fear. For a full 23 seconds after she leaves, the elevator doors finally close, then open, and then close again before the clip ends. This detail, the doors malfunctioning only before she leaves, and then behaving normally after she's gone, adds a final, chilling note to the footage. The public reaction was immediate and immense. The video wasn't just a clue. It became a worldwide spectacle, a puzzle that everyone rushed to solve. The theories, ranging from the mundane to the supernatural, began to flood the internet. solidifying the case as one of the most baffling modern mysteries. The release of the elevator footage was like dropping a match into a pool of gasoline. Almost instantly, the mystery went viral, exploding across social media platforms, Reddit forums, and YouTube. The sheer oddity of Elisa's behavior in the clip captured the imagination of millions. People watched the 4-minute video endlessly, dissecting every twitch, every hand gesture, every movement of her feet. This wasn't a static image or a cold case file. It was a living, breathing horror scene playing out on loop. The initial theories fell into two main camps: the psychological and the malevolent. The psychological theorists pointed to Elisa's known struggle with bipolar disorder. They suggested she was experiencing a severe manic or psychotic episode. Her frantic pressing of buttons, her attempts to hide, and the strange, expressive hand movements were interpreted as signs of paranoia, maybe believing someone was chasing her or that the elevator was an escape route that was failing her. They argued that the mental state explained the bizarre actions, even if it didn't explain her ultimate fate. The malevolent camp, however, saw something far more sinister. They believed the jerky, sped-up nature of the footage, which the police later claimed was due to technical issues, was actually an attempt to obscure evidence. They suggested there was someone standing just outside the camera's view, someone menacing her, perhaps controlling the elevator doors from the outside. Her looking out and then quickly hiding, her pleading gestures, and her seemingly panicked state all pointed to the presence of an unknown assailant or harasser. The fact that the hotel had such a dark history only fueled this narrative. Online sleuths spent hours attempting to stabilize the footage, slow it down, and even enhance the audio, convinced they would find a shadow, a reflection, or a muffled voice that the LAPD had missed or was deliberately hiding. The pressure on the police department became immense. They were not only trying to solve a complex missing person case, but were also fighting against a tidal wave of amateur detectives convinced they were incompetent or covering up something darker. Every statement the LAPD made was immediately countered by 1,000 anonymous experts on the internet. This online frenzy had a positive side. It kept the case alive, ensuring that Elisa Lam's name and image were constantly in the public eye. But it also had a negative side. It muddied the waters with misinformation, wild speculation, and irresponsible accusations that complicated the real investigation. The public became fixated on the video as the only clue, overlooking the larger context of her disappearance and the hotel's long, dark shadow. It was clear to everyone watching, the police, her family, and the millions of viewers worldwide, that whatever happened to Elisa Lam, it began in that elevator car. That small, cramped space, illuminated by the harsh security light, was the last confirmed location of a living, breathing young woman, and yet, it provided no answers, only deeper, more terrifying questions. The camera had captured her last private dance with terror, but it refused to name her partner. Weeks turned into a month, and the mystery of Elisa Lam remained a consuming enigma. Then, on February 19th, almost exactly 3 weeks after the footage was recorded, the case took a drastic, stomach-churning turn. Guests at the Cecil Hotel had been complaining for days about very low water pressure in their rooms. More disturbingly, they reported that the water coming out of the taps had a strange, dark color and a sickening, sweet odor, which some described as tasting off. They complained of the water having a foul, sulfuric scent, and one British couple who were staying at the hotel later said the experience was absolutely revolting, having brushed their teeth and even drunk the tainted water. Maintenance workers were finally dispatched to the roof to investigate the 4 large, bolted-down water tanks that supplied the entire building with drinking, cooking, and bathing water. Accessing the roof was difficult. A strict security protocol meant that doors were locked and alarms were set, allegedly. The only way to get to the tanks was via a main fire escape staircase that led directly to the roof or possibly a service ladder. The hotel staff needed to use a ladder to peer into the massive, 8-foot-tall tanks because the lids were so high up and heavy. When a hotel maintenance worker finally opened one of the tanks, they were met with a sight of unspeakable horror. Floating face-up in the murky, dark water was the nude body of Elisa Lam. The discovery was immediate and devastating, confirming the family's worst fears and immediately escalating the case from a missing person report to a death investigation. The sheer impossibility of how she got there instantly became the most pressing question. The water tanks were on the roof of a 15-story building. To reach them, one would have to ascend to the top floor, bypass the locked doors that secured roof access, and then climb onto a platform to access the tanks. Finally, they would have to open the heavy, 4-foot-wide lid of the tank, a feat generally considered impossible for one person to do, especially from the inside. The maintenance worker later testified that the tank lid was only partially open when he found her. Her body was recovered by the Los Angeles Fire Department, who had to drain the entire tank and then cut a hole in the side of the metal structure just to remove her. This meant that for nearly 3 weeks, the guests of the Cecil Hotel had been using water in which a decomposing body had been submerged. The revelation was deeply shocking and profoundly sickening, cementing the Cecil Hotel's reputation in the darkest corner of true crime lore. The investigation now shifted from the streets and corridors to the forensic lab, seeking answers in the tainted water and on the young woman's body. The location of the body only made the elevator footage seem all the more significant, connecting her final frantic moments to this impossible grave high above Los Angeles. The location of Elisa Lam's body, inside a sealed water tank on the roof of the Cecil Hotel, presented the police with a monumental logistical problem. The question wasn't just how she died, but how she got into the tank in the first place. The rooftop was not easily accessible. Hotel protocol dictated that the door leading to the roof should have been locked with an alarm set. While the hotel had a questionable track record with security, it was still a major hurdle for any guest to overcome. Witnesses and staff confirmed that the door was typically kept locked to prevent guests from accessing the area. If Elisa had managed to reach the roof, she would have had to locate the 4 massive cisterns. These tanks were not at floor level. They rested on concrete blocks, requiring a climb up a separate, often rickety ladder to reach the top. Even if she made it to the ladder, the tank lids were immensely heavy. Too heavy, many experts argued, for a young woman to lift, slide open, and then push back into place, especially if she were trying to get into the tank. If she had been fully dressed, which she wasn't when she was found, it would have been an even tougher struggle. The theory of suicide quickly became problematic. If she intended to take her own life, why choose such a difficult, physically demanding, and convoluted method? It involved multiple security breaches and feats of strength. More to the point, how would she manage to close the lid after she was inside? If the lid was closed, it suggests a second party was involved. If it was left open, as the maintenance worker found it to be, it still points to a huge, inexplicable struggle to get in, which would have surely attracted the attention of someone in the hotel or nearby buildings. The homicide theory also ran into obstacles. If someone had murdered her and placed her in the tank, they would have had to do so without being seen by staff or other guests. They would have needed intimate knowledge of the hotel's security bypasses and the physical strength to carry a body, presumably naked, up to the roof and lift it into the tank. This assumes a murderer who was either a very fit guest or, more likely, a member of the staff who knew the ins and outs of the building. But no compelling suspects emerged from the staff interviews. A third theory, that of accidental death during a psychotic episode, gained some traction based on her mental health history. Perhaps in a delusional state, she believed she was being pursued and sought the tank as a hiding place. Or perhaps she was following some kind of internal, hallucinated command. However, even with the aid of a psychotic episode, the physical impossibility of maneuvering the tank lids remained a serious objection. The lack of physical evidence, no blood, no DNA other than her own, and no signs of a struggle on the body or the roof, made it impossible for the police to definitively rule the death a crime. The tank itself seemed to be a perfect, sterile envelope, preserving the question of how she arrived there while simultaneously swallowing the answers. Following the gruesome discovery, the body of Elisa Lam was immediately transported to the Los Angeles County Department of Medical Examiner Coroner. Everyone, the police, her family, the media, and the internet sleuths, was holding their breath, waiting for the official report. The autopsy was the only cold, scientific chance they had to cut through the noise and determine exactly what happened inside that impossible water tank. The results, when they finally came, were both definitive and deeply confusing. The official ruling from the coroner's office was accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing factor. This conclusion suggested that no foul play was involved. There were no signs of physical assault, no defensive wounds, and no evidence of significant trauma that would indicate a struggle or murder. This lack of evidence of violence was a major blow to the homicide theory that the internet had so vigorously pushed. The toxicology report was equally important. It revealed that Elisa did have her prescribed medications in her system, including her medication for bipolar disorder. However, the exact levels were difficult to interpret. The report noted that the level of one particular medication was lower than expected, suggesting that she may have been inconsistent in taking her pills in the days leading up to her death. This finding immediately lent significant weight to the theory that her erratic behavior, captured so vividly in the elevator footage, was the result of a severe, unmedicated or undermedicated manic or psychotic episode. The coroner noted a few minor post-mortem injuries, like some scrapes and bruises, but these were deemed to be consistent with the struggle of trying to enter or exit the tank, or simply being moved around by the water. There was no conclusive evidence of sexual assault. Crucially, no alcohol or illicit drugs were found in her system that would have rendered her completely incapable of acting rationally, reinforcing the focus on her psychiatric condition. So, the official record stated that Elisa Lam, likely suffering a psychotic break, somehow managed to access the locked roof, climb the tanks, and either jump or fall into the water, where she drowned. The theory was that, once inside, she couldn't get the heavy lid open and was trapped, unable to climb out of the slick metal tank. The fact that her clothes were found near the tank or inside it, depending on which report you read, suggests she may have disrobed due to a common feature of psychosis known as paradoxical undressing, or simply believing the clothing was heavy or she needed to be rid of it for some delusional purpose. To the police, the case was essentially closed. It was a tragic accident, a terrible combination of a vulnerable young woman, an unsecure part of a notorious hotel, and a severe mental health crisis. But to the public, the official ruling felt incomplete, even insulting. How could a woman in a psychotic state execute such a complex series of physical maneuvers? Why did the door lock fail? Why was the lid only partially open? The finality of the accidental drowning verdict only served to deepen the public's skepticism, ensuring that the mystery would endure far longer than the official investigation. The psychological aspect of Elisa Lam's final days is perhaps the most difficult for the public to reconcile with the physical facts. When the official report pointed to bipolar disorder as a contributing factor, it shifted the narrative from a clear-cut crime to a complex mental health tragedy. Bipolar disorder, in its severe manic or psychotic phase, can induce intense paranoia, grandiose delusions, and a complete break from reality. This state can lead a person to believe they are in extreme danger and must take drastic action to hide or escape. Consider the elevator footage again through this clinical lens. Her frantic button pressing could be a desperate attempt to get away from a hallucinated pursuer. Her hiding in the corner is a classic paranoid behavior. Her strange, expressive gestures in the hallway, the waving and flailing of her arms, could be her arguing with or pleading to an invisible entity or a voice in her head, commanding her to move or to perform a certain action. In a psychotic state, a person's physical strength and tolerance for risk can be greatly enhanced by adrenaline and delusion, perhaps explaining the highly unusual trek to the rooftop. The hotel's initial complaint about her odd behavior from her roommates further supports the idea that she was already slipping into a manic or psychotic state before the night of February 1st. It's also important to remember the nature of her medication. Bipolar medication often requires strict adherence to a schedule. If, as the toxicology report suggested, she was inconsistent with her dosage, or if her body was simply metabolizing the drugs improperly due to stress or lack of sleep from traveling, the possibility of a severe episode becomes very real. However, the internet refused to let the psychological theory stand unchallenged. For many, the idea of a young woman's death being a tragic accident felt anticlimactic and unsatisfying, especially when framed against the sinister backdrop of the Cecil Hotel. They argued that even a person in a psychotic state would struggle with the mechanics of the tank. Why would she take her clothes off? Why would she climb into a water tank as a place of refuge? And what about the peculiar behavior of the elevator doors, which seemed to cooperate with her only after she had left? This created a major rift. On one side were the experts, the police and the medical examiner, who had physical evidence and a clear, albeit tragic, explanation rooted in mental health. On the other side were the millions of people who felt an emotional connection to the mystery, convinced that the simple explanation was a cover-up for something far darker, a paranormal event, a government conspiracy, or an uncaptured serial killer. The tragedy of Elisa Lam became a battleground between rational, scientific explanation and the public's deep, compelling need for a more dramatic, cinematic resolution. The lack of a clear, satisfying narrative allowed the most outlandish theories to take root, turning a sad incident into an enduring modern myth. The Cecil Hotel, already notorious, became a global focal point after Elisa Lam's death. Its history, which had been a whispered secret in downtown LA, was now splashed across every major news outlet and website in the world. The hotel was built in the 1920s, a time of grand aspiration in Los Angeles. But it quickly spiraled into infamy as the city around it descended into urban blight. It was, for decades, a place where people went to check in but not check out. The most famous, or infamous, of its residents were the serial killers. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, reportedly stayed at the Cecil for a period in the mid-1980s. After committing his horrific murders, he would simply toss his bloody clothes into the dumpster behind the hotel and re-enter through the back door, unnoticed, blending in with the general chaos of the area. Later, Austrian serial killer Jack Unterweger also stayed there in 1991, during the time he was stalking and killing prostitutes in the area. This history wasn't just interesting trivia. It created a sense of dread and expectation around any unusual death that occurred within its walls. After a series of suicides and violent deaths over the decades, the Cecil attempted to rebrand itself. A portion of the hotel was renamed Stay on Main, in an attempt to appeal to a younger, budget-conscious clientele, like Elisa Lam. This attempt to shed its dark past failed spectacularly with her death. The discovery of her body in the water tank, and the subsequent revelation that guests had been bathing in and drinking that water, was the final, indelible stain on the hotel's reputation. The irony of the rebranding was stark. The hotel couldn't escape its own history, and in fact, Elisa's case only added a bizarre, new chapter to its dark legacy. The tragedy turned the Cecil Hotel into a site of dark tourism. People traveled from all over the world just to stand outside and take pictures, drawn to the mystery and the macabre history. The elevator, the one where Elisa performed her final, perplexing dance, became the hotel's most famous and most avoided feature. The hotel eventually closed its doors to guests, an act that felt like a final surrender to the forces of its own darkness. This dark history played a massive role in shaping the public's perception of Elisa's death. To many, the possibility of an accident seemed too weak to stand up to the weight of the hotel's long history of evil. They believed the Cecil was a magnet for tragedy, a place where the veil between the normal and the deeply disturbing was thin. This enduring belief in a malevolent force, rather than just a tragic accident, is why the case remains so potent in the collective imagination years later. The hotel itself, a silent monolith of 1,000 tragic stories, became the real suspect in the court of public opinion. One of the most persistent questions in the Elisa Lam case revolves around the behavior of the elevator itself in the infamous footage. For a full 3.5 minutes, the doors simply refuse to close. After Elisa leaves the frame, they cycle normally, closing, opening, and closing again before the clip cuts out. To many viewers, this was proof that someone was manually holding the doors open, or that the elevator was under outside control. The technical explanation offered by elevator maintenance professionals and investigators is complex, but it leans heavily on the age and condition of the Cecil Hotel. Built in the 1920s, the elevator system was old and likely poorly maintained. Elevators of that era often had safety features that could be finicky. One common reason for a door to remain open, even after the call buttons are pressed, is if the hold button is activated. While we don't see Elisa press a hold button, a simple malfunction or sticky button could have kept the circuit open. Another key reason is the door sensor mechanism. If a door sensor detects an obstruction, even an intermittent or faulty one, the doors will not close. Given the age and condition of the hotel, it's entirely plausible that the sensors were malfunctioning, perhaps reacting to a phantom obstruction or simply failing due to wear and tear. Elisa's repeated pressing of the buttons, while seemingly frantic, would not override a safety feature preventing the doors from closing. However, the question of the doors behaving normally after she leaves remains the most compelling anomaly. The leading technical theory suggests that when she finally stepped out and moved down the hallway, she inadvertently moved an unseen object or activated a sensor that had been causing the glitch. For example, if she was leaning against the frame or if there was a slight pressure imbalance in the hallway due to her movement, the sensor might have finally cleared, allowing the elevator to complete its cycle. The subsequent closing and reopening were simply the elevator trying to register the pressed floor buttons and failing to detect a person inside. The alternative theory, the one favored by online sleuths, is that the footage itself was manipulated. They argued that the slow speed and the jerky quality were intentional, suggesting the police or hotel were attempting to conceal the presence of a second person. They pointed out what they perceived as missing frames or unnatural stops. The LAPD vigorously denied this, stating that the poor quality was simply due to the age of the security system and the method of recording and playback. Yet, the persistent mechanical strangeness of the elevator became a powerful symbol of a mystery that simply refused to be explained by logic, cementing the public's belief that a hidden hand was at play. The most horrifying consequence of Elisa Lam's death was the grim realization of the contamination of the hotel's water supply. For nearly 3 weeks, from February 1st to February 19th, the guests of the Cecil Hotel had been using water that had been sitting stagnant with a human body inside. This was not merely an unpleasant detail. It was a serious public health failure that triggered massive alarm. Guests complained about the water's appearance, taste, and smell for days before the discovery was made. The water was dark, sometimes black, and had an acrid smell. One guest, a British musician named Sabrina DeForge, described the taste as really, really strange, almost sweet, but very chemical. She and her husband had been drinking the water and brushing their teeth with it, and she mentioned she was sick for several days. Other guests corroborated these details, painting a picture of a hotel staff that was either negligent or completely overwhelmed by the chaos in their building. The health risks posed by the contamination were substantial. A decomposing body releases various bacteria and substances into the surrounding liquid. While the low concentration of the human remains in the massive water tank likely mitigated the risk of acute infection for most users, the thought of ingesting water that had been in contact with a corpse caused widespread panic. The Los Angeles County Health Department quickly ordered that the water supply be drained, sanitized, and tested extensively. Elisa Lam's body was not found to be carrying any highly virulent infectious diseases, mitigating the worst-case scenario. However, the emotional and psychological toll on the guests was immense. Many sued the Cecil Hotel for negligence, citing not only the obvious distress, but also the fact that they were exposed to unknown biological hazards. The hotel management faced a public relations disaster that no amount of rebranding could ever fix. The whole episode highlighted the extreme conditions and questionable standards of operation at the Cecil Hotel, especially in its later years. It's hard to imagine that such a health and safety lapse could occur in any properly maintained commercial establishment. The incident added a layer of disgust to the tragedy. Elisa Lam's final, mysterious resting place did more than just confirm her death. It forced an entire hotel full of unsuspecting people to participate unknowingly in the final, sickening chapter of her story. The dark water of the Cecil became a metaphor for the hotel itself, polluted, dangerous, and hiding a horrible truth. As the story grew, so did the number of bizarre theories connecting Elisa Lam's death to various dark corners of the internet and pop culture. The most prominent and widely discussed of these was the connection to a heavy metal musician named Morbid. Pablo Vergara, who performed under the stage name Morbid, released a music video shortly before Elisa Lam's death that contained deeply disturbing and thematic coincidences. The video, titled "Died in a Hotel," depicted a young woman being pursued and killed in a manner that some viewers found eerily similar to the imagined scenario of Elisa's death. The video also reportedly included visuals of a water tank. When online sleuths discovered that Morbid had once stayed at the Cecil Hotel, the speculation exploded, painting him as the primary suspect. The internet quickly mobilized, relentlessly harassing Vergara, sending him death threats, and posting his personal information online. This intense, baseless digital attack forced the LAPD to publicly address the matter. The police investigated Vergara and found that he had a solid alibi. He was in Mexico at the time of Elisa Lam's disappearance and death. He was completely cleared of any involvement. The experience was devastating for Vergara, who suffered intense psychological distress due to the digital witch hunt, illustrating the dangerous power and irresponsibility of the online amateur detective community. Another popular theory connected the case to the 2005 horror film Dark Water, which itself was a remake of a Japanese film. The movie features a plot centered on an apartment building where residents complain of dark, foul-smelling water, eventually leading to the discovery of a body in the building's rooftop water tank. The eerie parallels were too strong for many to ignore, suggesting either a deliberate copycat murder or a strange, preternatural influence guiding the events at the Cecil. The sheer volume of these connections, the elevator's strange behavior echoing psychological thrillers, the water tank paralleling a horror movie, and the accused musician with a darkly themed video, created a kind of feedback loop. These coincidences, no matter how tenuous, were seized upon as proof of a pre-planned, highly symbolic murder. This fascination with finding a sophisticated, cinematic killer or a paranormal explanation overshadowed the simpler, tragic reality presented by the autopsy. The case of Elisa Lam became a modern urban legend, a true crime puzzle that borrowed heavily from horror fiction, ensuring that the mystery remains unsolved in the minds of the public, regardless of the official police ruling. Despite the official ruling of accidental drowning, many fundamental questions about Elisa Lam's death remain stubbornly unanswered, providing the enduring fuel for the mystery. These doubts are not just based on speculation. They stem from the physical implausibility of the official narrative. One major point of contention is the security system failure. Why was the door leading to the roof unlocked? Or why did its alarm fail to trigger? A security breach of that magnitude suggests gross negligence on the part of the hotel, or, again, an inside job. It is highly unusual for a guest to be able to access the roof of a high-rise hotel without specialized knowledge or intervention. If the door was locked, how did she get through it? If it was unlocked, why was the hotel's security so lax in such a high-risk location? The tank lid is the second major obstacle to the accidental drowning theory. No matter the explanation, whether a psychotic episode granted her temporary superhuman strength or the lid was somehow left ajar, the act of getting the heavy lid off, climbing a tank that is 8 feet high, and then lifting herself into a small opening is a formidable physical task. Furthermore, the fact that her body was found unclothed suggests a deliberate action, perhaps due to paradoxical undressing, but it still complicates the narrative of a panic-driven flight for safety. Then there is the issue of contamination. If Elisa was in the water for nearly 3 weeks, why were the guests' complaints about the foul water not addressed more urgently? The delay allowed the health crisis to escalate, raising questions about the general state of the hotel and the competence of its staff in dealing with guest complaints and maintenance issues. The sheer time it took to connect the water issues to the missing person case reflects a serious breakdown in communication and attention. Finally, the elevator footage itself continues to defy a complete explanation. While a mechanical glitch is plausible, the coincidence of the glitch occurring only while she was inside, and then resolving itself immediately after she leaves, is statistically improbable. For those who believe in a darker explanation, the glitches and the inconsistencies are proof of a cover-up. The official ruling demands that we accept a series of improbable coincidences, a manic episode, a security lapse, a heavy lid, and a mechanical anomaly, all aligning perfectly to lead to a single, tragic accident. For millions of people, that chain of implausibility stretches the limits of belief, ensuring the case will forever be debated in the dark corners of the internet. For the family of Elisa Lam, the official closure of the case brought no real peace, only a profound sense of unanswered questions and lingering injustice. In the wake of the coroner's ruling, they pursued legal action against the Cecil Hotel. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit, arguing that the hotel was responsible for her death due to negligence. The core of the family's legal argument rested on the hotel's gross failure to protect its guests. They argued that if the Cecil had maintained proper security, specifically, if the door to the roof had been securely locked as required, Elisa Lam, regardless of her mental state, would never have been able to access the water tanks. The fact that she was found in a restricted, secured area of the hotel, which was also the source of the entire building's drinking water, demonstrated a catastrophic lapse in the hotel's duty of care toward its paying guests. The lawsuit didn't explicitly claim murder, but it definitely highlighted the unsafe and vulnerable nature of the hotel premises. The lawsuit went on for 2 years, and in 2015, the court ultimately sided with the Cecil Hotel. The judge ruled that the hotel could not have reasonably foreseen that a guest would be able to bypass all security measures, climb onto the roof, access the water tanks, and then climb inside one of them. In the eyes of the law, the specific set of circumstances that led to Elisa Lam's death was deemed unforeseeable. The court accepted the official ruling that her bipolar disorder was a contributing factor, suggesting that her actions were outside the realm of normal guest behavior that a hotel could be expected to guard against. This legal decision was a crushing blow to the family and further fueled the public outcry. To many, the ruling felt like the hotel was being absolved of responsibility for its documented history of poor security and maintenance. The hotel, meanwhile, continued to face the crushing financial fallout from the contamination crisis, including numerous other lawsuits from guests who had consumed the tainted water. The financial and reputational damage from the incident proved to be insurmountable. The hotel was eventually sold and underwent extensive redevelopment, rebranding itself as the Stay on Main one last time before closing entirely and being slated for conversion into mixed-use housing. The legal and financial consequences ultimately sealed the fate of the Cecil Hotel, forcing its dark history to finally conclude, though the mystery of the young woman who died within its walls remained open in the court of public opinion. The death of Elisa Lam transcends a simple case file. It has become a modern mythology, a digital ghost story that persists years after the official closing of the investigation. The confluence of elements, the notorious location, the young victim, the strange footage, and the impossible discovery, created a perfect, chilling storm of mystery that the rational explanation of accidental drowning can never fully calm. The legacy of the case is multifaceted. First, it stands as a stark and tragic illustration of the dangers associated with unmanaged or severe mental illness. The official narrative suggests a young woman, thousands of miles from home, suffering a severe psychotic episode that led her to perceive a deadly threat and seek an utterly irrational hiding spot. Her death underscores the vulnerability of individuals traveling alone while managing complex mental health conditions. Second, the case is a chilling testament to the power and peril of the internet. The online community's fascination kept the case alive, but their reckless speculation and attacks led to the unjust harassment of innocent people. It became a prime example of how digital sleuthing can devolve into rumor, character assassination, and an unwillingness to accept simple, if tragic, facts. The public's collective desire for a better story, a story of murder or the paranormal, often superseded the reality of a young life tragically cut short. Finally, the case is inextricably linked to the dark history of the Cecil Hotel. The building serves as a grim character in the story, its decades of violence and misfortune creating a fertile ground for supernatural and sinister explanations. Even if the police are correct, the public will always believe that the hotel itself, with its deep and heavy past, was somehow responsible for dragging Elisa Lam to her final, bizarre grave. Ultimately, the facts are simple. Elisa Lam entered the Cecil Hotel, acted strangely in an elevator, went to the roof, and died in a water tank. The interpretation of those facts is where the mystery lies. Was she fleeing a killer, a ghost, or the terrifying demons of her own mind? The official record says the latter. But the enduring legacy of the elevator footage is the doubt. The 4 minutes of silent, jerky horror that leave us staring at the screen, forever searching for a face just outside the frame, hoping to catch a glimpse of the truth that vanished with Elisa Lam. The story of Elisa Lam is a tragedy wrapped in an enigma. It forces us to confront the darkest corners of human behavior, the devastating consequences of mental health struggles, and the profound power of a place steeped in darkness. Even now, years later, when you watch that footage, the hair on the back of your neck stands up. You see her fighting, hiding, arguing, and you realize that, in those 4 minutes, you are witnessing the final, terrifying moments of a life that ended in the most baffling way imaginable. We can never know exactly what she saw, what she was running from, or what drove her to that impossible tank. And perhaps that's why the story of the Cecil Hotel's most famous and most tragic guest will continue to haunt us forever. What did you think happened to Elisa Lam? Was it a tragic accident fueled by mental illness? Or do you believe there was someone else involved in the hallway, someone outside the frame? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story chilled you to the bone, please like this video, share it with a friend, and hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the world's most compelling mysteries. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, not every ghost is an apparition. Some are just people lost in the dark.